Hello class. Today we're going to start our science lesson by getting out our science journals and turning to the next available page. With your pencil, go ahead and make 3 equal sections for our KWL chart. K for know, W for wonder, and L for learned. We're going to start in the first 2 sections today, or right now, but we'll work our way over to L. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to write down if you know the answers or what you wonder about the questions in the K and the W. So how would you describe a food web? What is the difference between a food web and a food chain? What does every food web and food chain begin with? So what is the main source of energy? What series of food chains do you know already? And what are some things you wonder about food webs? So for that last one, I want everyone to go ahead and write down in the W section. What do you wonder about food webs? Great responses, everybody. So now we're going to go ahead and watch a YouTube video. While we're watching this video, please pay close attention and make sure we're writing down notes in our K, W, and L. After the video, I want everyone to have at least 3 things written down in the L section. Good job, everybody. As I was walking around, I noticed that everyone had at least 3 things written down in the Learn section from the video. So now what we're going to do, I want everyone to go ahead and put your science journals away and your pencils down for now. I'm going to hand out an organism card to every student, and I want you to look at it carefully. Here's an example of what it will look like. It's going to have 3 main things that I really want you to pay attention to. The name of the organism, the picture, and where the organism gets its energy from, and who gets energy from that organism. So take a minute, look over your organism card, and think about it. Have you seen that organism in your community? Have you heard about that organism? Or where in the organism can you find it in the world? So now with our organism cards, I want everyone to take their card, go stand in line at the door, and we're going to walk outside for our next activity. All you need is your organism card. Now that we're outside, I want everyone to take about 5 minutes and walk around and look at everyone else's card and see if you can find the organism card that matches to yours. Find the card that gives you energy, and find the cards that you give energy to. Once you have found those cards, I want us to start by making a food chain. So what's the difference between food chain and food web again? Right, food chain is linear. It's a single line of energy flow, but food webs are a whole system where organisms can get their energy or give energy to multiple organisms at one time. So let's start by making our food chain. This means not everyone is going to be in this food chain. So work as a team in a collaborative setting and figure out who's going to be a part of the first food chain. Great job working together, everybody. Your food chain looks great. So now with this ball of yarn, I'm going to hand it to the sun because our food chain and food webs always start with the sun as the main source of energy. Now the sun is going to pass the energy, so let's pretend our ball of yarn is energy. The sun is going to pass its energy onto the next organism. That organism is going to pass its energy onto the following organism, and so on and so forth. Now we can see the flow of energy from one organism to another with this ball of yarn. Great job making our food chain. So now I'm going to take the ball of yarn back, and this time we're going to do the same concept but with our entire food web. So this time all organisms are going to be part of the food web. So take 5 minutes and get yourselves arranged into a food web. So make sure that every organism who gets energy from you or vice versa is a part of the food web. Again, with passing the ball of energy, we can see the way the difference really is between the food chain and the food web. Notice that when I'm holding my string from the ball of energy, the string is also being spread out between multiple organisms. Instead of going from one organism to the next, we all are connected through this web of energy. So great job, everybody. Now we can really see the difference with our eyes, because whenever we're out in the community, we can't really see the flow of energy from one organism to the next. But here we're able to physically see how each organism gets their energy from another organism. Great job on the activity outside. So I want you all to turn back into your science journals with your pencil and write down a couple things that you learned from our activity. You can also write some other K's and W's of things that you thought of while we were outside. Some questions I want you guys to think about whenever we're writing in our KWL charts right now is, what are 2 ways you can differentiate between a food chain and a food web? How would you predict the food web changing if one of the organisms went extinct or was no longer in the food web? Why do you think it's important to care about animals going extinct? How would our lives be affected if an animal in the food web went extinct? And what do you think are some environmental impacts that can affect food webs? So really think about those questions and write down some of your answers here on your KWL chart. Now that we're thinking about what could potentially happen if an animal were to go extinct or be removed from the food web, I want us to turn to the next available page in our journal, and I want you to write down a prediction. So go ahead and write down your prediction. What do you think would happen from the food web activity that we did? What if we removed the grasshopper from the food web? Write down some predictions. What do you think would happen? So now that we're thinking about what could potentially happen and what would be some of the consequences of an animal no longer being in the food web, I want us to explore this topic a little bit more. So we're going to go ahead and read a book called What If There Were No Sea Otters by Suzanne Buckingham Slade. So after we read the book, I want us to turn back to the predictions page that we wrote before we started reading. And look at your predictions. What did you think would happen if we removed an animal from the food web? And based on what happened in the book, whenever they removed the sea otter from the food web, what would really happen? And take a few minutes to write down below your predictions and write down what actually happens whenever we remove an animal from the food web. And while you're writing down that response, I want you to really think about it. Think about animals that are on the endangered species list or have gone extinct in our world. How has that made an impact on the way we live our lives now? And what can we do to ensure that animals are safe and continue to be able to play their part in the food web? So now I'm going to show you this graphic on the screen. Just so that way you can understand a little bit further and you can see a real demonstration, a real illustration of what would be the consequences in the food web and in the ecosystem if an animal was removed. So now that we've learned a few things about the environment, the effects and consequences of the environment and environmental impacts that can be made on the food web, let's go ahead and turn back to our KWL chart. So after reading the book and after talking about some of those things, I want you to write a couple more things down in the Learn section. What did you learn from that? Great job on your KWL charts, everybody. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to hand out a piece of construction paper to everybody. And on the front of your construction paper, I want you to label it Food Web. What you're going to do is get 6 organisms and draw a food web including 6 organisms. What I want you to be sure is on your food web is energy arrows. So make sure your arrows are going in the correct direction. Think back to the activity that we did outside and how the flow of energy went from one organism to the next. So think about the energy flow, and I want you to have at least 6 organisms on there that are all labeled and spelled correctly. If you need help, please look in your dictionaries. And I want you to be able to have time to color in your food webs after you've done labeling and drawing them. After you're done with this part, I want you to take a pencil and put an X through one of the organisms in the food web. And then on the back of the construction paper, I want you to write 1 to 2 paragraphs explaining how would the food web be different and what would the consequences be of removing that one organism that you put an X through. So take a few minutes. I want you all to work pretty well on this because it will be graded. So go ahead and draw out your food webs, make sure they're labeled and your energy labels are shown, and then write your 1 to 2 paragraphs on the back of the paper. While you're writing your paragraph, there's a few things I want you to think about. Some questions are, what happens to the food that the organism eats? What happens to the animal that eats that organism? Is there any way the effects of this animal being eliminated can be lessened? And what changes, if any, can humans make to ensure that animals are protected and able to do their jobs in the ecosystem? So think about those things as you're writing down your 1 to 2 paragraphs. Great job, everyone. As I'm walking around, I'm noticing everyone is doing really well with their organisms and their food webs, and it seems like everyone is almost finished writing their 1 to 2 paragraphs. So whenever you're finished, I want everyone to please turn in your science journals of your KWL charts. Make sure it's open to your KWL chart and just leave it right there on the front desk for me to look at it. And then make sure you turn in your construction paper because those will be graded. So please turn in those as well as your organism card from earlier. So make sure we have all of that stuff turned in. And I just wanted to say thank you for participating. Everyone was really engaged, and your KWL charts and your construction sheets look really well written and well thought out. So thank you guys so much for your participation. Let's go ahead and get that stuff turned in and get ready for our next lesson of the day. Thank you.